everyone, welcome to Ask Me Monday. I'm Vicki Howell here to start our week out creatively together as we try to do a few times a month on Monday at 12 Central. Thanks in part to our support from Knitter's Pride or Knit Pro if you are outside of North America. I'm so happy to be here today. I am here with you from my studio, the Yarnier Studios in Buda, Texas. I would love to know where you're watching from. You're getting a different angle of the studio today because on the other side where we normally shoot, maybe I'll show you when I flip the camera around, we've got these huge crates of our Yarnier boxes, which are being picked up, the majority of which are being picked up today to be delivered to you. And that has actually inspired today's video. So we are going to kind of deep dive into Bouclé yarn. It's a big trend right now, and I'm going to get into that and the whys and the whats and do a little jazz handing for you because it's really such a great texture and really fun to work with. But for those of you that check in with me every week, I'd love to hear about where you are watching from, what you are working on right now. What did you do over the weekend? What did you make? Were you able to fit in some creativity time? So let me know. If you are watching the replay later and you're really only interested in getting the scoop, you can just fast forward through all of this. And I also will have a pretty comprehensive post up on my website, vickyhowell.com at some point. Not right this second, but some point today to cover a lot of what we are going to be doing today and talking about today. All right, so I already said where I'm watching from. What did I make over the weekend? You know, I really took some time just to do some me crafting, and some of you saw this last week. I'm working on this oversized Bargello piece that normally would be made on tiny or semi-tiny canvas, but I'm working on big old latch hook canvas, and I'm using a super chunky yarn. This is actually mostly, with the exception of one color, my collaboration colors with Mad Tosh. It's Home, but I'm just playing around with that. This is gonna be a wall hanging. I played with color a little bit because I thought it needed some warmth and some depth, but now I'm thinking I made it a little bit too Wonder Woman logo-y, so I may pull that out. I really want more. I'm kind of obsessed with this color right now. That the closest thing that I've seen it named that really describes it is Velvet Rust. Like it's kind of a rust color, but it's got a rosier versus an oranger tone. And that's what I think that piece needs, but I just need to find a fiber that looks like that. So that's what I'm doing. It looks like Gina's working on a blanket. We've got Christina watching. I just said that. We've got Christina watching and Alice in Northern California. Amy's working on a sweater. Good for you. I always intend to, and I start them, and then that's as far as I get. And so, yep, it's good to see everybody. Good to see you, Mont, Gisela, Terry. So keep on checking in. And if you see somebody that's in your hood, give them a shout out. You know, in normal times when we're all hanging out again, maybe you guys can meet up for coffee and to stitch and hang out. So please let these boards be your community. Okay, so let's talk about Bouclé. I really wanted to do this because, well, a couple of things. The yarn that's featured in this month's Yarnier box is a Bouclé yarn. It is a collaboration with one of my favorite companies, Knit Collage, Amy Small, who's my dear friend, and some of you may remember her from, she was a guest on the Knit Show. She's also featured in my book, The Knit Vibe, but I'd been wanting to work with her on our Yarnier boxes, and I'll show those later on, for a long time, and we finally figured out a way to make it work for both of us. And the yarn that we're featuring is a Bouclé. So this really got me into thinking about, because traditionally, it's a little bit different than a lot of yarns I know that I've featured in my boxes, but just in general, it's different than probably the yarns that we all use majority share time, right? So I just thought we would dive into it. Sometimes when things are a little bit different, people get a little hesitant. Maybe they're not into it. They think it might be a hassle. And for me, it's so exciting to get to work with different textured fibers, different textiles, different shades and softnesses and depths and that kind of thing. And so what I hope to do with this episode and then with the post at vickihell.com is demystify some of the differences of boucle yarn, but also give you tips for success so that you can work with it and maybe fall in love with it as much as I will. Okay, so first of all, what the heck is a boucle yarn? All right, well, all that boucle means is a yarn that is either looped or curled, or the plies rather are looped or curled. It also can mean a weaving that uses a yarn that's looped or curled. So right now there's a huge trend of boucle furniture, and I've linked to that from my site as well. And I think I posted it on Facebook earlier, where you're seeing a lot of kind of nubby chairs or pillow tops that have a lot of texture to them. Those are boucles, and that is something that what it does is it brings a little warmth into a room. So let's say you like a really modern aesthetic. You might have a lot of clean lines or metals, but to just balance that out, if you can have just a little bit of a boucle piece, it'll bring in just a little bit of sophistication. It'll make the room more inviting, and it'll just sort of add a cozy vibe that I think we always need during the winter, but during times that are a little bit more difficult, it's also just a nice element to surround yourself with things that make you feel comforted. All right, so that's one reason to use them, and I sort of went off on a little tangent there. But the other reason is that it's a very cozy fiber, and it's very much evokes a shearling look. So even if you're not into full garments made out of something super cozy, you might consider using a boucle yarn for a collar of a denim jacket, or maybe just cuffs of a corduroy piece, or boot cuffs to go with your boots, just to add a little warmth. And so there are a bunch of different ways and reasons and items, and I'm going to loop back a little bit in a second to what those are. But first, it probably makes the most sense to show some boucle yarns. So, are all boucle yarns the same? Are they all equal? And the answer is no. So there are different types. So the term is used very loosely. And so just because if you've ever worked with one and maybe had a little bit of, maybe found it to be a little fussy, don't write off all boucle yarns. There are different types, and I'm about to show them to you. And then there are some tips for even the fussier ones that'll make them less fussy. I'm gonna get to those in a second. So I'm gonna show you these few different examples of one. So this is probably what most of you think of when you think of boucle. It's sort of it's got like a finer core, and then you see these big loops. So often this is what folks get frustrated with, are the big loops. And I'm going to tell you what you can do to make that less frustrating. But this is also what gives it like this lovely texture. And a yarn like this, one that's fine like this, works really well, with an open weave and for garments, but it's also great doubled together with a more traditional yarn. I should also say that the boucle falls under the category of being a novelty yarn. So novelty yarns are ribbon yarns, fun fur, these boucles, anything that is not quote unquote traditional, that has a little more texture, that might be made out of something maybe non-traditional. But the other thing I wanted to tell you about boucle is, what is boucle made out of? So traditionally boucle is made out of nylon. So that's at the heart of, or the center of the fiber. You'll almost always notice some form of a core. And it is generally a piece of nylon. I'm going to show you another piece where this is more pronounced, because the maker has actually used a different color of nylon cording. So usually so there's a nylon cord of some form, or core rather, and then there's some form of wool, alpaca, sheep's wool, what have you, or some form of faux wool. So in the case of this one, this doesn't have animal fiber. Well, it has a breath of it, but mostly this is made of acrylic. So it's sort of a mock wool or a faux wool. So those are really the two components. So you've got the thin nylon, I keep calling it a core, but it's just, a strand. And then it's plied together with something that is either wool or evokes the look of wool, but the actual curls. If you were to look at a sheep or an alpaca and you would see sort of that texture in the hair or whatever in the fur, those are the two components. Okay, so this is an acrylic one. This is one that you can just get at a craft store. This is sort of a finer weight one. This one is an alpaca blend. This one is actually by Haiku, and it is really light and airy. And then the one that we are featuring in Yarnier this month by Knit Collage is a little different from that. Now, what you'll notice here is you're not seeing big loops. Look at the difference. But these are both Bouclé yarns. Isn't that cool? So this one does have little curls. It does have little texture. It does have little nubs, but you're not seeing as many. You could probably really get close in and find little loops, and that's why you would put it in the category. But this particular one is very different because the inner core is the same color as the outer, or it's a couple shades darker rather, and it really is just sort of plied and married to that center. So just for comparison, I'm going to hold them all up next to each other so that you can see these all fit into the same category, but they're very different in both fiber and result. So if you've ever worked with any one of these and not had the best of experiences, I would love to encourage you to try one of the other variations and see if you have a different experience. Also, I want to just give a general side note. I found in general that the acrylic ones are not as easy to work with as the wool fibers because there is already, with nylon, you don't have a lot of give. But if you're then adding acrylic on top of that, there isn't the lanolin to keep your needles and your hooks flowing. And they're also you're working with a petrochemical, which happens to have a little bit less pliability than a natural fiber. That's just my experience. That is not, that does not mean that you should not go to your local craft store and try that. I just want you to have that information so in case that is your experience too, you don't write off Bouclés forever. All right, so that is the general construction and definition of Bouclé. So now I want to just revisit projects one more time. These are mittens, obviously. Bouclé yarns are great for cozy projects like this because they have that kind of shearling look, So we've got some mittens. We've got, this is a crocheted, those are knit mittens. We've got a crocheted wrist warmer. Both of these patterns incidentally come in the February Yarnier box. But this particular fiber also works really, really great for more open weave, flowier projects. And I'm going to talk about that when we talk about tips in a second. But consider a Bouclé for a blanket, consider it for a pillow top, consider it for a pillow. Size up your needle, go for a bigger wrap, or just embellish things with it. Whether you're a weaver and you just need a little bit of texture just woven in with some plain, nice, something like a silk or a cotton, or if you want to add, as I said earlier, your collar, your cuff, maybe a little fun like hemline or a brim. Just expand, play, have fun with it. Okay, so the rest of the tips that I want to give you, well, actually, I'm going to flip over the camera in a second, but now I want to give you some tips for just success. So some of them I want to flip the camera over and some of them I don't, so I'm going to try and maybe do them in a little bit different of order than they are on my website. Again, I will have this all listed at vickyhowell.com, just so I don't have to flip the camera back and forth, because it is just me here and potentially a ghost. Have I told you this place is haunted? It's another story. So it'll be a little bit cleaner that way. All right, so let's talk tips for success for working with Bouclé yarn. All right. First of all, mark it. So I highly suggest getting yourself some markers. These happen to be the Knitter's Pride Mindful Collection ones, but you do you, whatever you'd like. If you're a knitter, they're gonna look something like this. They'll have the little O. Crocheters, you want something that looks a little bit more like a bulb safety pin. I thought I have one, I do not. Or just an open, one that can open and close. It needs to be interchangeable. The reason why that you wanna mark is because there is so much texture to the yarn. As we've said, it's a little bit more difficult to see where a round begins and ends, or if you're doing a pattern repeat, which there probably won't be a ton of in a pattern calling for this type of yarn, you may not be able to see it as clearly. So just do yourself a solid, get yourself some markers to show beginning and ends of rounds, or show where a repeat is, or show where your progress is. That'll do you a solid. It's real simple, but it's a big deal, so do that. Okay, now this is a little non-traditional one, and this would normally, I probably would have ended with this one, but again, with the camera work, we're gonna go this route. Years ago, I hosted the show called Nitty Gritty, and we used to do what were called knit bits, and I remember doing one on mohair. And it occurred to me this morning that that exact same tip that we used 15 years ago at Nitty Gritty for mohair is great for Bouclé. Here goes. All right, so one of the frustrations that can happen with working with a yarn that's textured like a Bouclé or a mohair is that if you have to frog it, and frog, for those of you that aren't familiar with the term, it just means to rip out. I think it comes because a frog says ribbit, so rip it. It can get caught up on itself, and then it just, sometimes it can feel a little bit disastrous. So, walk with me for a second. I would love for you to just consider throwing your project in the freezer if you have to do that. So if you take your project, you put it in the freezer, you will get rid of some of the pliability that happens with a fiber, and you'll have a much easier time unraveling your piece, because a little bit stiffer, so there's not the pliability, and your fibers are not going to stick together like Velcro as much when they're in that state. So that's my second tip. That's tip number 2 for working successfully with Bouclé yarn. Okay, I think the rest of them I want to flip the camera around, and those of you that have been with me for EVs know that this is a hideous process. So, but you will be able to see what I meant when I said, can you see all that? Let's see. You can see these are just, we've got containers filled with boxes that are going out today with our situation. Okay, with our situation. I say situation whenever I forget words, so that's a little about me. What I meant was our subscription boxes. Alrighty, so let's go back to success. All right, here's my next tip. Go big. So whenever you're working with a yarn, there's always a suggested needle size or hook size, but there's also just a standard needle and hook size that you can find, like if you were to go to a yarnstandards.com or just general industry standards. So for instance, let's say you're working with a worsted, usually it's about a size 7 or 8. If you go up to an Aran, it might be a 9. A light chunky might be anywhere from a 9 to a 10.5, etc. So if you're working with a Bouclé yarn, I highly recommend that you go up at least a couple sizes. If you go big, you are going to be able to see your stitch definition better, and it will be a lot easier for you to work the stitches. So let me show you what I mean. Here is normally a yarn of this weight. If it were just a regular simple slick yarn, probably want to work it at about a 9, size 9 needle. But because of all of the goodness that's happening to fluff, it will bloom a lot, and we want to be able to see our stitch definition, and we also don't want to have to battle with all that's filling that individual stitch. So instead of using a smaller size, we might go up to an 11, a 13, or even, as I've done here, a 15. And the reason why I wanted to show you it on a 15, and I'm working with, these are Knitter's Pride Smart Sticks, is I wanted to show you how going up that much, because of the blooming that happens with the curls and the texture from a boucle, you're not getting what you would get if you were working with a standard traditional yarn, which would be a big sort of netted piece. There's nothing wrong with netted pieces, but for this particular yarn, it's not, it probably isn't going to be the look that you would be going for with a cozy textural yarn. So what happens is you get a piece that is, you can see the stitch. So there's no doubt, let me just show you. There's no doubt where each stitch is. You can see the definition, so that makes it really easy to work with. But also, you're going to get a lot more drape that way. The drape of your piece, so if you're making a scarf or a blanket or a sweater out of a boucle yarn, consider going up a couple needles or hook size, same for crochet, and then give it a try. Check your gauge, check your flow, and I think you're really going to find that it has a beautiful drape in a way that you wouldn't really consider when you think about something that's fluffier, right? All right, so go big. That's my first tip. Now, there's always an exception, it seems like, to a rule. When you won't want to go big is if you're working on a piece where, like a plushie, that you have to stuff, or something maybe that you're going to wear on a hand that needs to be cozy, you probably want less holes. And so you might want to, instead of going up 2 or 3 sizes, only go up 1 or 2 size. In this case, it would be hooks because this is crocheted. And that will still give you the ease of working, going up a little bit so that there's still room for those little curls to play, but without causing, it'll take away some of that drape, which will give it a little sturdiness. The sturdiness will then, in turn, give you the warmth. Or if you were working with a stuffed animal, it'll help prevent the stuffing from coming out through the holes. So that would be the only exception to the rule of not going big. So that is tip number, what are we on, 3? Okay, so my next tip is get to the point, or don't. Here's what I mean. Let's talk hooks. So we've got different kinds of hooks here. We've got, let's see, can you guys see those? Yeah. We've got our Knitter's Pride Zing, and you can see the Zings have a really rounded head. On the opposite end of the spectrum are the Knitter's Pride Symphony, or my own Vicky Howell hooks that are made of wood, but you can see that the heads are really pointy. And then in the middle are the waves. They kind of split the difference. They're kind of the Goldilocks. So these are your choices. When working with a boucle yarn and crocheting, if you are working on a piece where you want the weave to be tighter for that aforementioned mitt or toy, so that you've only gone up maybe a size from what you normally would go with, I suggest going with a pointy hook. Now, this will not work in another instance, and I'm going to tell you in a second, but when you're working on a piece that's tightly woven and is a boucle, it might be frustrating if you're working with a rounded hook to try and get into where the next stitch is. I really like having a pointed hook to really clearly be able to dive into that stitch to work it. I find that it makes it easier, it makes it go smoother and fast, and it just in general makes the whole experience nice. So again, if you're going with a tighter weave for a project with boucle, I recommend using a pointed hook. And now I'm going to swing the opposite direction. if you are working on a more open weave, or if you were working with a boucle that has really distinct loops. So just as a refresher, the boucle that I was working with before, the loops are not all that distinct. This project also tight weave. This boucle here, the Haiku Simply Air, very distinct loops. But then I've also started working on a little piece that's very open weave. Now, in this case, what might happen, and the same goes for needles as hooks, I'm just sort of going interchangeably so we can all get along. It might be a little frustrating if you were working with a pointed hook here, because you might accidentally, and when I say you, I mean the collective you, because I've done it a million times, you might accidentally be prone to try to go through one of the loops instead of one of the stitches. So if you use a hook, I wonder if I can get it to focus anymore. If you use a hook that's more blunt or rounded, it will not easily go through one of those loops. It just won't. You'd have to really work at it. And so that might help you to then avoid that and just work in the stitches, in the actual stitches versus the loops. Does that make sense? So again, really distinct loop boucle and or open weave, go blunt. Less distinct loop boucle and or more dense, go pointy. All right. And my last tip for today, and I think I'm going to go ahead and flip it around here because I don't think I need to see anything. Oh, this is just a sidebar. If anything that I've shown you today, you're not sure if that's going to work for you, I always encourage you to try all of these things yourself. And if it doesn't work for you, try something else. Don't give up just because I didn't say that that was the way to go. You do you. It's really important that you find what works for you. All right, let's see if I can successfully move this around again. All right, so for my last tip, just as a general note, nothing but professionalism here. Just as a general note for working with boucle, and this one came from a conversation that I had with Chris, who works with me at Yarnier. And he used to work in a yarn shop for a long time. What he really told me, and it really resonated, what he told me, and it really resonated with me is that working with a yarn like a boucle is a mindful choice. So this is for mindful knitting. This is not the like, get it done, like let's work with something that's slick and fast and, all of those things. This is about big, wide gestures. Put your shoulders back. Take a breath. Enjoy the process. Bigger gestures. This isn't about those, okay, I'm going to speed through this. I'm going to hold on to my hook or my needles tight. We're going to go in. We're going to do this is the opposite of working with lace work or working with something really smooth and fast. Those two are opposite, but where you really want to have these finite moves and really hone in. This is more, just like the yarn, is more about a comfort, cozy experience. So that's it. Be mindful. Probably not just in boucle, but it applies to this. And then this is not necessarily just boucle, but I just wanted to do a last sort of side note. If you're working with a boucle or any yarn that starts with a raw wool, this is already soft. It feels soft, already just here in the hank. But if you grab one and you're like, oh, that looks so fluffy and maybe doesn't feel as great as I thought it was, please don't put it down and think that it is dead to you, because these yarns truly benefit from soaking in a wool wash. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of great ones on the market. You can even use like a baby shampoo, but there's a lot of specifically for wool washes. Let it soak for 30 minutes in, kind of a warm water. Don't agitate it. We don't want felting. And it will bloom and open up and release all of those like juicy oils that will make it super soft. This yarn is great for all of those shearling inspired projects, as I said earlier. So remember how soft that will get with just a little wash. All right, so the last thing is we do actually have we're doing that huge shipment today, but we do have boxes left. I'm so excited to be able to offer. We like to surprise you whenever we can. We've stopped really surprising because I do the unboxing. So every once in a while we work and with different companies. And this time Amy has sent us maybe 7 or 8 colors. You're getting one at random. It's a surprise. It's a subscription box. It's not a, you're going to go to the store and order something specific. It's part of the fun. But we also have a buy, sell, trade group in case you want to trade these with someone. So you'll get one of these special put up hanks. Look, she did a little special Yarnier knit collage label. So we've got those, and I have linked to it from VickiHowell.com. It comes with the patterns for the mittens and the mitts. It comes with a little llama tea strainer because we went with a cozy theme. Some Texas chai tea and an arnica recovery oil that's in a roller ball that you can put in your Notions bag. I don't know about you, but I get achiness in my joints, especially my thumbs. Sometimes wrists. This is just to help cure what ails you as far as stitches, joints, especially in the colder weather goes. So that's it. That was a long one. That was a lot of breath. That was a lot of deep diving, but I'm super excited for you to start working with Bouclé Yarn. And please be sure to tag at Vicki Howell with any of your Bouclé adventures. And I am going to go work with some more Bouclé myself. I'm thinking that I need an off-white pair and a black pair and also a paprika color pair and all of the things. So I know what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the day. I hope that you have a creative rest of the day and week as well. And I will see you back here on Facebook live at noon Central next Monday. All right. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.